When rangers finally checked an abandoned station in Yosemite, they found a logbook entry that made their blood run cold. "Dad's leg broken. Please send help." It was written 6 years ago. But here's what made investigators' hands shake. The entry was dated August 15, 2018, 8 full days after the search teams had given up and left the area. Someone was alive when everyone thought they were gone. The Mercer family disappeared on August 7, 2018. David Mercer, 42. His wife Jennifer, 39. Their daughter Emma, 14. Their son Lucas, 11. They were supposed to be back from their 5-day backpacking trip on August 8th. When they didn't show up, Jennifer's sister called the Park Service. The search began immediately. The Cathedral Range in Yosemite is not forgiving territory. Steep granite walls, dense forest, streams that can swell into raging torrents in minutes. The Mercers were experienced hikers, but experience doesn't always matter out there. The wilderness doesn't care about your resume. Search and rescue teams found their abandoned campsite on August 9th. 2 tents still standing. Food hanging in a bear bag, untouched. Sleeping bags laid out. It looked like they'd simply walked away and never came back. There was no sign of struggle. No blood, no torn fabric. Just 4 people gone, as if they'd evaporated into the mountain air. The search intensified. Helicopters swept the valleys. Dogs tracked scents that led nowhere. Volunteers combed every trail within a 10-mile radius. Days turned into a week. The window for survival was closing. On August 14th, the official search was scaled back. By August 15th, most teams had packed up and left. The Mercers were gone. The lead search coordinator, Frank Morrison, had seen dozens of missing persons cases in his 23 years with Yosemite Search and Rescue. But something about the Mercer campsite bothered him from the moment he arrived. The tents were positioned perfectly. The food bag was hung exactly right. The sleeping bags were rolled out, ready for the night. Emma's stuffed rabbit was tucked inside her sleeping bag. Lucas's hiking boots were lined up neatly outside the tent door. "It's like they were coming right back," Frank told his team. "Like they went for a short walk and planned to return in an hour." The search dogs arrived on August 10th. Their handler, Maria Santos, had worked alongside Frank for years. But that day, the dogs did something she'd never seen before. They picked up the trail leading away from camp. Strong and fresh, the dogs pulled hard, eager to follow. But 300 yards from the campsite, both dogs stopped. They circled the same spot, whining. Their tails dropped. One sat down and refused to move. "The scent just stops," Maria said. "Right here. Like they walked this far and then—" She looked up at Frank, troubled. "Like they just stopped existing." They tried different dogs. Same result. Every trail went cold at the exact same spot. The helicopter crews reported similar frustration. Day after day, they saw nothing. No signal fires. No SOS markers, no movement. By August 12th, more than 200 volunteers were searching over 40 square miles. They found nothing. Frank gathered his team that evening. Everyone knew the statistics. After 5 days in wilderness conditions, survival rates plummeted. 4 experienced hikers don't just vanish, Frank said, studying the map. They left their camp for a reason. But what reason? Jessica Huang, one of the younger rangers, had been studying weather reports. There was heavy rain on August 6th. What if someone got injured? Then they'd use their emergency beacon, another searcher pointed out. The Mercers had registered a personal locator beacon with their trip plan. Unless they couldn't reach it, Jessica said quietly. Or unless something happened so fast they didn't have time. The theories multiplied. Bear attack, but no blood. A fall, but helicopters checked every drop-off. Each theory had a fatal flaw. On August 13th, everything changed. A storm rolled in. freezing rain and wind strong enough to ground the helicopters. The search had to pause. Frank sat in the ranger station that night, staring at the map. Somewhere out there, if any of the Mercers were still alive, they were enduring that storm. His phone rang at 2 a.m. Maria, the dog handler. "Frank, I've been thinking about where the scent trails stopped. That spot is almost exactly halfway between their campsite and the Cathedral Peak emergency station." Frank sat up straight. "You think they were heading for the station? It makes sense. If someone was injured badly, the nearest shelter is that station. It's about 8 miles from their camp. Have we checked it? It's not on the search grid. Too far off the main routes." Frank looked at the map again. The Cathedral Peak station was remote, outside their primary search area. But if the Mercers were desperate, "We'll check it first thing when this storm clears," Frank said. But the storm didn't clear for 2 days. By the time helicopters could fly again, it was August 15th. The official search was being scaled back. Incident Command was calling it. Too many resources for too long with no results. Frank argued for one more day, just one more sweep. He was overruled. He never got to check the Cathedral Peak station. His team was reassigned. The equipment was packed away. 200 people had searched for 8 days and found nothing. Frank Morrison retired 3 years later, but he never stopped thinking about that case. He kept the search map in his home office. When news broke in 2024 that Emma's logbook entry had been found, Frank was watching the evening news. He saw the date, August 15th, the day the search had been called off. They'd been 8 miles away. Just 8 miles, if the storm hadn't come, if Command had given him one more day. The wilderness doesn't care about if-onlys, but Frank Morrison did. That's what everyone believed for 6 years. Ranger Michael Torres pushed open the door of the Cathedral Peak Emergency Station in late September 2024. He was 26 months behind schedule for this inspection. Budget cuts had turned quarterly checks into whenever-we-can-manage checks. The station was a small wooden structure, barely 15 feet by 20 feet, with a wood stove, emergency supplies, and a logbook for hikers to record their presence. The air inside was stale and cold. Dust covered the shelves. A mouse had made a nest in the corner. Michael flipped open the logbook, expecting to see the usual entries. Hikers bragging about their mileage, complaints about blisters, bad jokes about bears. Then he saw it. The handwriting was shaky, almost frantic. The ink had faded to a pale blue, but the words were clear. August 15th, 2018. Dad's leg broken. Can't move him. Need help. Please. Emma Mercer. Michael's throat went dry. He knew that name. Every ranger in Yosemite knew that name. The Mercer family. The search that had consumed 2 weeks of park resources. The case that had never been solved. But this entry was dated August 15th, the day after the search had been called off. 8 days after they'd vanished. Emma had been here. Alive. Writing in this book while helicopters flew back to their bases. While search dogs were loaded into trucks. While her family's story was being filed away as another tragic mystery of the mountains. Michael radioed dispatch immediately. Within hours, investigators were on site. They photographed the entry. They dusted for prints. They searched every inch of the station. What they found made the mystery darker. There were 4 sets of fingerprints in the station, 4 different sizes of boot prints in the dust. The wood stove had been used. Empty food wrappers were stuffed in the trash bin, wrappers from the emergency supplies stored in the station. Someone had bandaged a wound with gauze from the first aid kit. The medical tape was still stuck to the wooden table. 4 people had been here. They'd eaten. They'd tried to treat an injury. They'd written in the logbook. And then they disappeared again. The question that haunted investigators was simple and terrible. Why didn't they stay? The station had food, shelter, a working stove. The logbook was meant for exactly this purpose, to alert rangers that someone needed help. Emma had done everything right. She'd written the entry. She'd stated the emergency clearly. So why wasn't she here when rangers finally arrived? The answer, investigators realized, lay in something nobody had considered: the inspection schedule. The Cathedral Peak Station was supposed to be checked every 6 months. If the Mercers had known that, they would have understood that help was coming. They could have waited, but there was no way for them to know that the station hadn't been inspected in over a year before their arrival. No way to know that it might be months before anyone came. They'd waited. For how long, nobody knew. Days, maybe. Perhaps a week. But when no one came, they made a decision. They left. But where did they go? And why hasn't anyone found them since? The investigation that followed the logbook discovery was exhaustive. Dogs were brought back to the station. They picked up scents, but the trails were 6 years old and led in conflicting directions. Some dogs tracked north toward the high peaks. Others tracked west toward the lower elevations and the tree line. It was as if the family had split up. Investigators analyzed the entry itself. Emma's handwriting showed stress but not panic. The letters were formed carefully, despite the shakiness. She'd wanted to be understood. The phrase, "can't move him," suggested David's injury was severe. A broken leg in the wilderness is life-threatening. Infection, blood loss, shock. Even with basic supplies, time was critical. They studied the supplies used at the station. The food wrappers indicated they'd eaten 4 meals. The bandaging suggested they'd dressed the wound at least twice. The ashes in the wood stove showed they'd kept a fire burning for at least 1 full night, maybe 2. Then investigators found something else, scratched into the wooden wall beside the door, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. LM plus EM. We tried. Lucas and Emma. The children had left a mark, not in the logbook this time, but something more permanent, something that said, "We were here. We didn't give up." The search expanded again. This time, teams focused on the routes a family with an injured father would take, not the trails. Injured hikers don't follow trails. They take shortcuts. They make desperate choices. They head for water sources, or they look for the fastest way down the mountain. 3 weeks into the renewed search, a hiker found something 8 miles northwest of the station. A makeshift splint. 2 sticks bound together with torn fabric and medical tape. The fabric matched the description of David Mercer's jacket. The tape matched the roll from the Cathedral Peak Station. The splint was lying beside a creek bed. The area was thick with brush and deadfall. Not a place anyone would go intentionally. But if you were trying to get down the mountain fast, if you were following the water, you might end up here. Investigators marked the spot and pushed deeper into the drainage. The terrain was brutal. Steep slopes covered in loose rock, fallen trees blocking every path. This was the kind of place where one wrong step could mean disaster. 200 yards downstream, they found the second clue. A child's shoe. Small, pink and gray, worn down at the heel. It was wedged between 2 rocks in the middle of the creek. Emma's shoe. The search records confirmed she'd been wearing pink and gray hiking shoes when the family disappeared. Now investigators had a timeline and a trail. The Mercers had left the station. They'd traveled 8 miles carrying or helping David. They'd resplinted his leg at the creek, and then they'd continued downstream. Emma had lost her shoe in the water. But here's where the story takes its darkest turn. The creek that the Mercers had been following doesn't lead to safety. It leads to the Cascade Falls area. During late summer, those falls are manageable. But in mid-August of 2018, Yosemite had experienced unusual weather. A late-season storm had rolled through on August 13th and 14th. The rainfall had been intense. Creeks that were normally ankle-deep had become chest-deep torrents. If the Mercers had been following that creek on August 15th or 16th, they would have encountered water moving fast and cold, water that could sweep a grown man off his feet, water that would be nearly impossible to cross with an injured person. Search teams focused on the area below Cascade Falls. They used ground-penetrating radar. They brought in swift water rescue specialists. They searched every pool, every undercut bank, every place where a body might be trapped. They found nothing. Months passed. The case grew cold again. Investigators had more questions than answers. The logbook entry had given them hope, but that hope had led to a dead end. 4 people had survived for at least 8 days in the wilderness. They'd made it to the station. They'd eaten. They'd tried to signal for help. And then they'd walked back into the mountains and vanished. But then, in March of 2025, a rock climber made a discovery that changed everything. He was ascending a granite face about 2 miles east of Cascade Falls. It was a remote wall, rarely climbed because the approach was so difficult. Halfway up, he found a small cave. Not really a cave, more of a shallow overhang in the rock. And inside that overhang, he found a backpack. The backpack was weathered and faded, but the name tag was still legible. Jennifer Mercer. Inside the backpack were a water filter, a headlamp, a lighter, and a journal. The journal was water damaged, but much of it was still readable. Jennifer had been documenting their trip. The early entries were cheerful. Descriptions of wildflowers, comments about the kids' excitement, notes about which trails they'd hiked. Then the tone shifted. August 7th. David slipped on wet rocks this morning. His leg is bad. We're trying to get back to the trailhead, but he can't put weight on it. We're moving so slowly. August 8th. We didn't make it out. David's in too much pain. We found a ranger station. It's empty, but there's food and a stove. Emma wrote in the logbook, "Surely someone will come soon." August 10th. Still waiting. David's leg is swelling badly. Lucas keeps asking when help will arrive. I don't know what to tell him. August 13th. No one has come. We've been here 6 days. David says we can't wait anymore. He thinks the station is abandoned. We're going to try to get down to the valley on our own. August 14th. The rain started. We made it a few miles, but David can barely move. We found a creek. We're following it down. The entry stopped there. The rest of the pages were too damaged to read. But one page near the back of the journal was still partially readable. It wasn't a diary entry. It was a letter. Jennifer had written it to her sister Karen. She must have known she might not make it out. The ink was smeared and faded, but forensic document specialists were able to reconstruct most of it. Karen, if you're reading this, then you know we didn't make it home. I need you to know we tried. We tried so hard. David's leg got worse every day. The bone was sticking out through the skin by the 3rd day at the station. I did everything I could. I cleaned it, I wrapped it. But I'm not a doctor. I'm just a mother watching her husband die and pretending everything will be okay for the kids. Emma has been so brave. She keeps telling Lucas that help is coming. She wrote in the logbook like we taught her. She did everything right. Lucas is scared, but he's trying not to show it. He keeps asking me when the helicopters will come back. I tell him soon, but I don't believe it anymore. We waited 6 days, Karen. 6 days in that station, and nobody came. The food is running out. David can't even stand now. He told me we have to leave. He said if we stay here, we all die. So we're going to try. We're going to follow the creek down. Maybe we'll find help. Maybe someone will find us. If they don't, please tell my kids I love them more than anything in this world. Tell them I'm sorry I couldn't get them home." The letter was never finished. The last line trailed off into an illegible smear. Investigators made copies of the letter and distributed it to the search teams. It was a gut punch. Jennifer's words made it real in a way that reports and evidence logs couldn't. This wasn't just a case file anymore. It was a mother writing what she thought would be her last words to her sister. It was a woman making an impossible choice between staying and hoping or moving and risking everything. Karen Summers, Jennifer's sister, was shown the letter in April of 2025. She'd been the one who reported them missing 6 years earlier. She'd been the one calling the Park Service every day during the search, begging for updates. She'd been the one who refused to believe they were gone, even when the official search ended. When she read her sister's words, she broke down. But then she did something investigators didn't expect. She went through every photo, every email, every text message she had from the week before the Mercers left for their trip. She was looking for something, anything that might help. And she found it. A text message from David, sent on August 3rd, 4 days before they disappeared. It was a photo of their planned route, a screenshot from a hiking app. David had drawn their path in red. 5 days, 4 campsites, a loop through the Cathedral Range, and right there on the map, marked with a star, was the Cathedral Peak Emergency Station. David had written next to it, "Checkpoint, midway point, good place for emergency if needed." They'd known about the station before they even started the hike. They'd planned for it. It was their safety net. And when David got injured, they'd navigated their way there. They'd done exactly what they were supposed to do. Karen gave investigators access to David's cloud account. Inside, they found more. David had been meticulous about trip planning. He'd downloaded topographic maps. He'd researched water sources. He'd even saved a PDF from the National Park Service website about emergency procedures in the backcountry. One document in particular caught investigators' attention. It was titled, "Remote Ranger Stations and Emergency Shelters in Yosemite." The document listed 23 stations across the park. Next to each station, it showed the inspection schedule. Cathedral Peak was listed as inspected quarterly by park rangers. David had trusted that information. He'd believed that if they made it to the station and logged their emergency, help would come within days, maybe a week at most. He had no way of knowing that budget cuts had changed everything. That quarterly had become whenever possible. That the station he was counting on hadn't been checked in over a year. The investigation expanded once again. This time, authorities looked into the maintenance records for all remote stations in Yosemite. What they found was damning. Of the 23 remote emergency stations, only 9 had been inspected according to schedule in 2018. Budget cuts that began in 2017 had slashed the backcountry ranger program by 40%. Staff had been reassigned. Inspection routes had been consolidated. Some stations that were supposed to be checked every 3 months hadn't been visited in over 2 years. The Cathedral Peak Station was one of the worst cases. The last recorded inspection before Michael Torres arrived in September 2024 was in March of 2017, 18 months before the Mercers arrived. If David had known that, he never would have brought his family there. He would have stayed at their campsite. He would have sent Jennifer and the kids for help while he waited. But he didn't know. The information on the Park Service website was outdated. Nobody had thought to update it. Congressional hearings were held. Budget oversight committees demanded answers. How had this been allowed to happen? How had a family died because a website wasn't updated and a station wasn't inspected? The National Park Service director testified that the agency had been operating under severe financial constraints, that difficult choices had to be made, that backcountry ranger programs were deemed lower priority than visitor center operations and main trail maintenance. Karen Summers attended those hearings. She sat in the front row every single day, and when she was finally allowed to speak, she held up a photo of her sister's family, David, Jennifer, Emma, and Lucas, smiling on a hiking trail. It was taken the summer before they died. "This isn't about budgets," she said. "This is about 4 people who trusted you, who followed your rules, who did everything right, and you failed them. My niece wrote in your logbook. She asked for help, and nobody came because you were too busy saving money to check if anyone needed saving." Her testimony went viral. News outlets across the country picked up the story. The Mercer case became a symbol of what happens when bureaucracy prioritizes cost-cutting over safety. Donations poured into the National Park Service specifically for backcountry rescue operations. Congress allocated emergency funding. Policies changed overnight, but none of it brought the Mercers back. Investigators continued analyzing the evidence from the cave and the area where the remains were found. They wanted to understand the family's final days. They needed to know exactly what had happened after they left the station. The medical examiner's office brought in specialists. Forensic anthropologists examined the bones. Pathologists studied tissue samples preserved by the cold and dry conditions in the rock chimney. Slowly, a timeline emerged. David had died first, likely within 48 hours of leaving the Cathedral Peak station. The infection from his broken leg had spread into his bloodstream. Sepsis had set in. Without antibiotics, he didn't stand a chance. His body showed signs of extreme fever and dehydration in the days before death. Jennifer had survived longer. Her remains showed evidence of severe malnutrition and hypothermia, but also something else. Bruising on her hands and arms, the kind of bruising that comes from trying to climb with inadequate equipment. She'd been attempting to get down the rock face, probably looking for help or a safer route. Emma and Lucas had stayed together. Their remains were found in an embrace. The younger children had outlived their parents by perhaps a day or two, based on the forensic analysis. They'd huddled together for warmth in that narrow chimney, waiting for a rescue that would never come. The hardest part for investigators was realizing how close they'd been to being found. The maintained trail that passed within 3 miles of their location was a popular route. Hikers used it regularly. If the Mercers had made it just a little farther, if they'd been able to signal somehow, they might have been saved. But the terrain had trapped them. The granite walls were too steep, the forest too dense, and their strength had simply run out. One detail haunted the lead investigator, Sarah Chin, more than any other. Among the remains, they found Lucas's small backpack. Inside was a collection of rocks, smooth river stones, each one carefully selected. Lucas had been collecting them during the hike, a child's innocent hobby in the middle of a family adventure. Sarah had children of her own. She understood what those rocks meant. Lucas had been happy on that hike. He'd been having fun, finding treasures, making memories with his family. And then everything had gone wrong in a way that no one could have predicted. The case file grew to over 3,000 pages. Every piece of evidence was cataloged, every witness interviewed, every decision made by the family was analyzed and second-guessed by experts. But all of that analysis couldn't change the fundamental truth. The Mercers had been failed by the system that was supposed to protect them. In June of 2025, a memorial was built near the Cathedral Peak Emergency Station. It's a simple stone marker with 4 names and 4 dates. Hikers who pass by often leave small rocks on top of it, a tribute to Lucas and his collection. Some leave flowers, others leave notes. The emergency station itself was renovated. It's now equipped with a satellite phone that connects directly to park dispatch. A solar-powered beacon on the roof activates automatically if anyone opens the emergency supply cabinet. The logbook is checked remotely via a camera system that uploads images every 6 hours. These changes came too late for the Mercers, but they've already saved lives. In the 2 years since the new systems were installed, 7 emergencies have been logged at remote stations across Yosemite. All 7 were responded to within 12 hours. All 7 groups made it home safely. Rangers who work in the backcountry now carry copies of Emma's logbook entry in their packs. It's a reminder, a promise, a weight they carry with the rest of their gear. Michael Torres still thinks about that day he opened the logbook. He's had nightmares about it. In his dreams, he arrives at the station just hours after Emma wrote that entry. In his dreams, he's able to save them. But he wakes up knowing the truth. He was 6 years too late. He requested a transfer after the remains were found. He couldn't work in that area anymore. Couldn't pass by the Cathedral Peak station without seeing Emma's handwriting in his mind. Couldn't hike those trails without wondering if things would have been different if he'd pushed for an earlier inspection. His therapist told him it wasn't his fault, that the failure was systemic, not individual. But guilt doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about systems and budgets and policy decisions made by people in offices far away. Guilt just sits in your chest and reminds you that you could have done something, if only you'd known. The Mercer family's story became a case study in search and rescue training programs across the country. It's taught at the National Park Service Academy. It's discussed in wilderness medicine courses. It's analyzed in emergency management seminars. But beyond the training and the policy changes and the memorial stones, there's a simpler truth that everyone who knew the case carries with them. Sometimes doing everything right isn't enough. Sometimes the wilderness wins. And sometimes the only thing standing between a family going home and a family becoming a cautionary tale is a single missed inspection and an outdated website. The investigation officially closed in August of 2025, exactly 7 years after the Mercers disappeared. The final report ran to 417 pages. It detailed every piece of evidence, every decision point, every moment where things could have gone differently. The conclusion was brief. The Mercer family died due to a combination of environmental factors, a severe medical emergency, and systematic failures in backcountry station maintenance protocols. While the family demonstrated appropriate wilderness skills and made reasonable decisions based on available information, they were ultimately failed by the systems designed to support backcountry safety. Karen Summers received a copy of the report. She read it once and never opened it again. The details didn't matter to her anymore. What mattered was that her sister's family was gone, and no amount of analysis would bring them back. She started a foundation in their name. The Mercer Family Wilderness Safety Foundation. It provides grants for backcountry emergency equipment, funds training for volunteer search and rescue teams, and lobbies for consistent maintenance standards across all national parks. Every year on August 15th, the foundation holds a vigil at the Yosemite Visitor Center, right in front of the display case holding Emma's logbook entry. People gather to remember the Mercers. Rangers attend in uniform. Families who have been rescued from backcountry emergencies come to pay their respects to the family whose death changed the system that saved them. And every year, Karen stands in front of that display case and reads her sister's letter out loud. The letter that was never sent. The words that were meant only for her, but have now become a rallying cry for better wilderness safety protocols. "We tried so hard," she reads, her voice steady but her eyes wet. "We did everything right." And then she adds her own words, the same ones she says every year. "And now, because of you, others will make it home." But the journal gave investigators the answer to one crucial question. Why did they leave the station? They didn't know anyone was coming. After 6 days of waiting in an empty building with no sign of rescue, David made the call. They had to save themselves. It was the right decision based on what they knew. It was also the decision that killed them. The discovery of the backpack triggered another intensive search of the area. If Jennifer's pack was in that overhang, maybe there were other signs. Maybe the family had used the cave as a shelter. Maybe they were still nearby. Teams rappelled down the granite face. They searched every crack and crevice. And 15 feet below the cave, wedged in a narrow chimney in the rock, they found remains. 4 sets of remains. 2 adults, 2 children. They were huddled together in a space barely wide enough for them to fit. The position suggested they'd been trying to stay warm, trying to stay together. The medical examiner's report concluded that David Mercer had died first, likely from infection and complications from his broken leg. The others had survived longer, but not much longer. Hypothermia, dehydration, exhaustion. The storm that had swollen the creeks had also brought freezing temperatures to the high country. Without proper shelter, without a way to stay warm, they didn't stand a chance. They'd been less than 3 miles from a maintained trail, less than 6 miles from a staffed ranger station. If they'd just stayed at Cathedral Peak, if they'd waited 1 more week, they would have been found. But they didn't know that. They couldn't know that. The question that haunted everyone involved in the search was this: what if the station had been inspected on schedule? What if a ranger had arrived on August 16th, just 1 day after Emma's logbook entry? The Mercers would have still been there. David would have received medical care. The family would have gone home. But budget cuts don't think about families. Staff shortages don't consider the consequences. A delayed inspection is just a line item in a report, until it's not. Until it's 4 people dying in a crack in the mountain because no one checked a logbook in time. The National Park Service issued a statement after the remains were identified. They acknowledged the missed inspection. They promised policy changes. They increased funding for remote station checks. They installed emergency beacons at every backcountry station in Yosemite. But those changes came 6 years too late for the Mercers. Emma's logbook entry is still there, preserved behind glass at the Yosemite Visitor Center. People stop and read it. They see the shaky handwriting. They imagine a 14-year-old girl, terrified but trying to be brave, writing those words while her father lay injured and her family waited for help that wasn't coming. Some visitors cry when they read it. Others stand in silence. A few leave flowers at the display. There's a plaque beneath the glass. It reads, "In memory of the Mercer family. Sometimes the wilderness wins, but we can honor those we've lost by never stopping our search for those who remain." The Cathedral Peak Station is inspected every 3 months now. Rangers check the logbook every time. They make sure the supplies are stocked. They make sure the stove works. They make sure that if someone writes an entry like Emma's, help will come quickly. But late at night, when rangers sit in that station during their inspections, they think about the Mercers. They think about Emma's handwriting. They think about a family that did everything right and still didn't make it home. The wilderness doesn't care about schedules. It doesn't care about policy changes. It doesn't care about memorials or plaques or promises to do better next time. The wilderness just is. Cold and indifferent and always hungry. And sometimes, the only thing standing between survival and tragedy is a logbook entry that no one reads in time.